Okay, so the poll tax rebellion, what can you tell us about it?
Yes, well, the poll tax campaign is often actually, I think, an overlooked part of British history, of British movement history, yet it's one of the most effective campaigns, I think, ever in the history of this country. And it's particularly relevant in an era that we're going to be going into of fuel and energy shortages, of gouging and profiteering from major corporations, and from an age where we're starting to look at campaigns like Don't Pay and seeing whether we can make them reality. So let me give you a little history of what happened during the poll tax movement, and then we can get into some chat about it. So the anti-poll tax campaign started in 1987 from the very humble beginnings of a few people sitting in a room. So always bear that in mind. It only takes a few people sometimes. By 1992, it toppled the most notorious post-war prime minister, organised the largest demonstration ever seen to that point, and ultimately reversed the hated law. There were riots, imprisonment, and a lot of organising along the way. Yet when it started, no one could have seen it coming. So what was the poll tax? The poll tax, or community charge, as Thatcher dubbed it, was an attempt by the Tory government to impose an equal rate of council tax for everyone everywhere. The ill thought out slogan for the policy was, why should a duke pay more than a dustman? So the Conservative government decided to try and roll this out in Scotland first, which, as you'll know, is always a bad idea. The Scottish people did not react well to it. So despite the Labour Party and the Trades Union Council opposing the anti-poll tax movement, so supporting the Conservative government and supporting the government to punish any action that broke the law, there was an organisation called the Militant. They were a faction of the Labour Party. They were Trotskyists who later went on, once kicked out of the Labour Party by Tony Blair, they formed what is now known as the Socialist Party. And they were one of the key actors in forming what was called the Federation of Poll Tax Unions in 1988. By 1989, they had created a non-payment army of 1 million people. 1 million people said, we are not going to pay the poll tax in Scotland. Marches and rallies involved tens of thousands. Council chambers were occupied. Sheriff's offices were barred entry to non-payers' homes and often returned to find their own offices under siege. The tax was fatally wounded by that point already. And then when the campaign spread to England and Wales, there was another 13 million new recruits to the non-payment army. And it basically rendered the poll tax a dead duck, because when you've got 14 million people in the UK refusing to pay this tax, that is going to absolutely devastate the government. At first, communities tried a tactic of filling up courts. And I think this is really interesting because it shows how campaigns can change, and also how you don't always get it right to begin with, because the idea was, we'll just refuse to pay, and then what we'll do is we'll overwhelm the courts, which are already flooded, and just basically overwhelm the bureaucracy's capacity to enforce this law. But what it turned out is that some people did end up getting sentences by repeatedly going to court, and what they realized is an actually easier and more effective thing is just not to turn up to court at all. Then bailiffs are sent out to people's houses. People on the estates and in the communities where the Poll Tax Federation had organised would look out for bailiffs, and then people would simply hide from them after being told by other people on the estate that the bailiffs were coming. There would be, I've met many activists who talked about this, phone trees. Each person would have 3 numbers to call when they saw bailiffs, and then each person would call 3 people. And so everyone on an estate or in a community would know when bailiffs were turning up, and they just couldn't find people to bring them to court. And if they did if they did find them and actually try to take them off an estate, they were often surrounded and forced to let go of the people. So by 1990, the Anti-Poll Tax Federation decided to call a demonstration. It was clear that the campaign was winning, but the chance to come together and feel the power of the united movement was seen as important. As with many days that get out of hand, the police made several statements about being up for it, in quotes, and slapped that all over the front page of The Sun for the demonstration, basically saying that they were ready to kick off. The peaceful demonstration turned into a riot after the police charged the front of the demonstration with horses and cars, severely injuring several people. There was a lot of arrests made, and the protesters were blamed originally by the media, but as it turns out, all the arrests for violence got overturned thanks to the new technology of handheld video cameras, something that we're a lot more familiar with now. Those handheld video cameras caught the true culprits that started the riot, the police. So there was a lot of property damage done, not only in London, but all over the country, and the riots went on all over the country. So we're nearly there now. A few months after this, Thatcher was deposed by the Conservative Party, and John Major, her successor, tried to enforce the policy for another few months until he gave up in early 1991. Though there were other demonstrations, which again became riots, the main activity during that period was prisoner support and court support for those refusing to pay. The mass refusal of payment, the direct action against courts and bailiffs, the community organising to bring people together, and the demonstrations and active resistance of protesters, as well as the mutual aid of supporting people through the courts and prisons, all combined to make this one of the most successful political movements in British history. So, something I think we can learn a lot from there. I don't know what you guys think.
What's on my mind, at least, is how we might take what they learn and, be inspired by their actions and even apply it to our modern day circumstances, because I think we're finding ourselves, like you said earlier, in similar precarious situations.
Yeah, I think there are some examples and there of actions that did work and the actions that didn't work that we can learn from, in terms of filling up the court still does end with people getting arrested and going to prison, which included, by the way, some Labour councillors in places like Liverpool, which had like a very radical council. And that actually, with enough people and with the right organisation, you can just completely stop a bureaucracy by not engaging with it. Leon, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just reflecting because I signed up to the Don't Pay UK campaign, which is obviously very live. In fact, today is the day that they issued information about starting the strike. I know that they've referenced the poll tax a lot in the campaign as being something that's, as you described it, sort of successfully pushed back against a really unjust policy or set of policies. So now today with Don't Pay UK, in case you're not familiar, the idea is that to build a rent strike or a bill strike, so people refusing to pay their bills, and it would be a mixture of people who can't afford to pay their bills because energy bills have gone up so high, and the cost of living has gone up so much for people, and that's unmanageable if you're on a lower income. But also people such as myself who probably could afford the bill rise, but who, in solidarity with those who can't, are being called on to also join the strike. I mean, their target number when they started the campaign over the summer, I think, was they wanted either 1 or 2 million people to sign up. I think there's about 250,000 plus people who have pledged to strike, to not pay bills. The start of the whole campaign had been delayed from the beginning of September or October, when the initial price hike was going to go up, partly because there was a success in terms of the government backing down on price hikes. So there was, I guess, a small win, not just for Don't Pay UK, lots of other organisations and people in the movement involved in campaigning and pushing back against that, plus the disastrous run of politicians leading the Tory party who couldn't successfully manage anything, it seems, let alone a price hike. But now, today, 1st of December, as we record, is the day that the strike is supposed to start. So it's really nice to hear you talk about the poll tax and kind of be reminded of what is possible in terms of a victory for people in our movements if we do act collectively. It takes a lot of organisation, and I guess that's the kind of, if you don't know if it's going to work, but you hope it will, and you try and put your efforts into into supporting organizations so that it becomes effective and it works. But there's clearly a really strong precedent. So I'm interested to see those parallels between that campaign, the poll tax campaign, and the Don't Pay campaign, the non-payment of utilities, that's starting potentially today. Well, it is starting today.
It's that level of organization that you need for something like that really struck me. It's like, in order to have that kind of network, you're talking about phone trees, like people alerting other people about the bailiffs, maybe coming around to support, is like you need really strong links in local communities. And it feels like, because of, the way that that council housing has been sold off, the way that jobs have been centralized within cities, lots of different ways that our economy has been organized, that a lot of those community ties have been destabilized. And if you think about something like the Don't Pay campaign, like a lot of the people who aren't able to pay, or might be kind of on the edge of not being able to pay, will be renters. And those are the people who are moved around so often. Like, it's really hard to kind of build those strong community links often when you're renting and you're moving every year. So I haven't been very sort of close to or engaged with the Don't Pay campaign, but I'd be really interested to know how they're going about trying to build up that kind of solidarity within communities in order to build the strength that you would need for a win on this.
Yeah, there's some really interesting points there. And I think when we're thinking about organizing, how does this apply today? A couple of things that I think are positives are that to recognize that this was all organized in opposition to the Labour Party and the trade union movement. So typically when people think, oh, we need a mass political party, or we need the trade union movement to do anything effective in this country. Actually, in fact, if you look back over the past 20 years, and this is one of the first examples, any campaign that's been won has actually almost always been opposed by the Labour Party and the trade union movement. As useful as they can be to organising, and as useful spaces as they can be, they're not fundamentally necessary. So that's a positive. But as you say, also the process over the past 30 years of individualisation and of isolation of people and communities has made certain things more difficult. You can spread information more rapidly, more quickly, but its impact is also vastly lessened by the way that we share information. Again, there's a lot of studies on this that show that people can take in way more information. They get more information, and they can even be moved by a lot of stuff, but will it stick with them? That's something, I think that's the challenge for this period of the 21st century, is to combine digital communications and actual community organizing to build the strength in exactly the areas you're talking about. Those of us who are all precarious, how do we organize together and actually have those stronger ties that are not just like a momentary inflaming of the emotions from some piece of information, but like a commitment to an action and feeling supported to that and by that. Because there was that, even in the process of deindustrialization that was going on in 1990, there were proper real communities. Having said all of that, a lot of it went on in the major cities that were as isolated then as they are now, where people were as isolated then as they are now. I think it's about reaching existing networks as well, and just making sure that everyone who's already in existing networks is signed up, whether that's maybe church, mutual aid, existing campaigning organizations that have already got mass lists. It's bringing people on in those ways who already said, yeah, we're interested, we want to be active, and getting that sort of critical mass.
You've mentioned mutual aid a couple of times now, so could you give us a reminder of what that means? I know we spoke about it in the past, but just for anyone who's listening, what is mutual aid?
Yes, that's my fault for using something jargon heavy. It's where we help each other out, basically, in a very practical sense. We do it not as a sort of charitable thing, like I'm going to help out someone poorer than me because that makes me feel nice. Nothing wrong with that, but it's where we help each other out because we recognize if I help you and you help me, we're both going to be better off. We're all going to be better off if we all help each other out. And that will mean in cases like this, it can be emotional support, like going through the court system, being arrested, things like that, very emotionally trying, but having a community around that you can talk to about those things is really important. But food, like dropping around dinners, having breakfasts together, cups of tea, financial support, loaning each other money, so practical material resources, real world stuff, and emotional resources. That's how we can really help each other out for the sake of each other. I think hopefully that gives us something cool to think about when we're trying to organize and recognize that we can win. We can win when opposed by every part of the establishment and existing power structures, and we can win massive, and we can bring down governments and refuse to pay tax. By the way, today the government still has hundreds of millions of pounds of uncollected taxes from that period, like people just didn't pay for 2-3 years. So that's one of the things you say is always certain: death and taxes, right? Well, it shows that not even taxes are that certain. Like, we can win, and we have. And it's not in the even too distant past. And it's during an era when we thought we lost all the time, which was under Thatcher. So I think that's a good takeaway, hopefully, for today's episode.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your reflections. I've certainly learned a lot today, and I look forward to hearing from you guys next time. Make sure to check out our socials, especially our TikTok, where you can hear directly from our community organisers who are doing incredible work on the ground. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel, and keep up to date with future episodes. In Power, Love and Rage from the Breathe Network.